Good afternoon. It's Monday, 31st of August, noontime here in Sydney, Australia. Welcome to the Changemakers Way Daily Talk. I'm your host, 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗃. Today, I'm going to talk about the power of words and how words, even simple use of language, can shift mindset without even us realizing it. Let me start. So for most of you, how many words of snow do you know? For me, being from Philippines, I only know one word for snow. And therefore for me, when I was in the USA and I experienced snow, especially, in Columbus, I only have one experience of snow, or maybe two. There's the slushy snow. Right? There's the wet kind of snow I learned later on, and there's the dry kind of snow. But that's as far as my experience of snow is. Funny that I'm talking about snow. It's winter time here in Australia. We don't get snow, but I know it's summertime there in the USA. Indulge me for a moment. But do you know how many words of snow Eskimos have? There are around 50 words or more that Eskimos have to articulate snow. Can you imagine that? So that means that potentially they have a broader experience of what snow is like. Now, as if that isn't enough, recently I watched a BBC documentary that the Scottish have more than 50 words for snow. Can you guess how many? I would have never guessed it. They have 450 words, more than 450 words for snow. Can you imagine that? It's because they have so many different expressions for so many different vast experience of snow. So here I am, I only know two phrases, wet and dry snow. And they have all these different kinds of descriptions, very nuanced descriptions of what snow is like. Just that, language can actually limit or broaden our experience. And for those of us who are multilingual, we can appreciate this. I speak Filipino or Tagalog. I speak Ilocano, woohoo, which is a dialect from the northern part of Philippines. I used to speak 𝗪𝗺𝗺𝗺, but now because I haven't used that for a long time, I can hardly articulate myself fluently in 𝗪𝗺𝗺 or even read 𝗪𝗺𝗺. And of course, I'm also fluent in English, and I've also learned basic Spanish in the past. I managed to survive, traveling in Mexico and Guatemala and Belize for 10 weeks without using English for most of the time. So my experience is that speaking in English, I feel like I'm a different person as opposed to if I'm speaking in Ilocano. Ilocanos can be a bit hard, and you can hear it in their intonation. And we do have certain words that we can't even express in Tagalog. And even in Tagalog, we have words that we can't express in English. So for example, a really good term, and I don't know to this day if there's actually an equivalent English term for it, we have what we call bayanihan. And that is a very important concept for Filipinos. The notion of community spirit, of helping each other. And I think that has been reflected in the way we have dealt with crises like the pandemic compared to, for example, the US. But also that concept of bayanihan is reflective of our culture, not just Filipino, but Asians in general, of a more community, family-centered kind of mindset. So we have no problem. I would say we have no problem, but we didn't have as much challenge considering impact on community when it comes to all the policies or regulations that we needed to abide to in order to counter the issue of the pandemic. I know there's a lot of complaints in the Philippines. I know there's a lot of fallout still, but it's not as bad as it is in Western society, especially the USA. I did hear that many Filipinos complaining about, this is against my individual freedom and blah, 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 blah. Because I think it's because we have that spirit of bayanihan where at the end of the day, we still are very communal and help each other out in the toughest of times. Unless you know of an English equivalent of the word, please type in and let me know. Another word that I have so much fun with, especially with my partner Shad, is the word picon. And it's got to do with sense of humor. Especially with Ilocanos, we kind of have a very rough sense of humor that you need to be really thick-skinned about, and it's like banter, and the person who really loses out in the banter and ends up losing their sense of humor, that's as close as I can find a definition for picon. So we have that word picon in Philippines, which I can't find a translation in English. So there's a lot of internal experience that I have, my internal landscape, and is reflected in how I interact with people, I interact with the world, that is defined as well as influenced by the language that I speak. As I said, I feel like a different person when I'm speaking in English as opposed to when I'm speaking in Filipino or Tagalog, or especially Ilocano, which is my dialect that I grew up with. But here's another example. Words can also be very, very powerful in framing issues. Now I'm gonna get a bit serious here, so bear with me, and it might sound political, but it isn't. For example, let's take the issue of what's going on right now, systemic racism in the USA. And for me, I wanted to go on live last weekend and really have a rant about what's happened to, what's the name of the guy, Jacob Blake, and back to back with that issue of Kyle Rittenhouse, something like that. Well, for those of you who are not aware, a few days ago, again, it happened that this black man was apprehended by police, and he ignored the police. He continued walking towards his car, and the police followed him, shot him 7 times in the back. And I'm like, why? Why does that happen? And to make matters worse, the following day, there was a 17-year-old white man in Kenosha, and he shot 3 people. Now, the worst of it all, he has an AR-15, ended up shooting 3 people. And the worst of it all was I read a comment in Facebook, our thread, saying that, well, serves him right, the black guy, turning his back from the police when he's asked to surrender himself. So serves him right being shot. Whereas the white guy, well, he surrendered himself. But for me, that guy killed 3 people, and the other person who's black, what made him a threat other than his skin color? So pardon me for this. Now, let me get back to the topic, which is reframing the issue. This is not an issue about Black lives to me. This is not an issue about simple systemic racism to me. I'm not simplifying it. Actually, it's complex. I shouldn't use the word simple. This is a moral issue, and this is a human rights issue. That's why when I was this, it makes me feel angry and makes me feel like crying. When I was in the USA, I know I did a video when there were the BLM protests, and I just couldn't help myself. I just cried. Especially that day, it was Independence Day. We were celebrating the Philippines Independence Day. And the irony of it was I see these people still feeling very, very oppressed in what is supposedly the bastion of the modern world globally. Well, that's what I grew up with. I grew up with this colonial mentality from the Philippines, thinking that Americans, the USA, is a great nation. To me, what's happened is a human rights violation. And I don't know why people don't see that. And to me, framing the issue as an issue of human rights changes, I feel, would change and shift the conversation. Because if it's only, let's say, Black Lives Matter, sorry, I don't mean to just say only. If it's framed as Black Lives Matter, or if it's framed as systemic racism, then it sounds like it's a domestic issue. Then it sounds like it's a US issue. You know, that's something that Americans just have to deal with. But it is a human rights issue. And we have a Universal Declaration of Human Rights that's signed up, that different countries have signed up to. And then let me see if I can go to the preamble. Let me just read, bear with me, because when you even read what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, and the preamble of the Declaration of Human Rights says, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Just those two sentences. So what's happening right now, regardless, whether you're white, you're Black, but it just so happened that this group of people who share a certain color are the ones who are oppressed the most. And is that not oppression when you are not a threat except for the color of your skin and you get shot in your back 7 times? And someone who killed 3 people who is white is not considered an immediate threat. How is that not oppression? How is that not tyranny? And how is that not a violation of human rights? And I emphasize that because there are a lot of other countries that are being looked down upon, and I'm not going to say which countries, for violating human rights. So I shake my head. As I said, power of words. Words are powerful, and the language we use are powerful. I think it's time that what's happening in the USA be framed as an issue of human rights and not go beyond just calling it systemic racism, go beyond just calling it BLM. Those are still very powerful. But if you recognize this as a human rights issue, then the rest of the world is with you. So, rant over. And again, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and for you change makers out there, the Sustainable Development Goals we know is a great framework. That is a product of collaboration across across different parties in the world, across different organizations, grassroots organizations, government organizations, even the corporate, have come together for that Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved by 2030. And they go hand in hand in protecting human rights across the world. Human rights is just as important as climate change. So Again, that's that's my rant. And I don't care if you are a Democrat or Republican or whatever. At the end of the day, do you have a moral compass? Do you still have a moral compass? Because it doesn't matter, Democrat or Republicans, those are just words. Those are just words. At the end of the day, do you still have a heart? Do you still have a moral compass? So let's not be victims to filters of words. Let's free ourselves with the kind of language and the words that frames us. Because language can either free you or imprison you. And we need to be aware of how powerful words are and our power, and reclaim our power with the words that we use that will define our experience of reality, but not only us, the people around us. So, in summary, I started with a very simple example, which is comparing me as a Filipino. I only have 2 phrases to experience snow, which is dry snow and wet snow, whereas the Eskimos has 50 words. And the amazing Scots have more than 450 expressions and words for snow. If you don't believe me, Google it in the BBC documentary. And my second point is that, you know, certain issues can be reframed and can even have a different response to it by just using different language for it. Like, for example, are we using systemic racism or are we using human rights as the frame for the issue? And then finally, being multilingual, and for those of you who are multilingual, you can attest to this, that different languages brings us a different experience of the world. And it is actually an advantage to be multilingual, because that means we have that mental flexibility with that vast linguistic experience that we can't experience in one language that we can do experience in another language. So as I said, I'm proud that in Philippines we have a word called bayanihan, and despite our failings as a nation and our politicians, we still have it in us to help each other as a community. And I don't know the translation for English. Maybe there is a word for that in English and other languages. But pardon me for my rant. As I said in my earlier videos, injustices can make me cry and really make me angry. So that's just me. And for you who are change makers out there and who want to step up and create change in the world, join me. I have a webinar September 3 on overcoming hidden roadblocks and obstacles to creating change. I'll put the link in my description. And the power of language can either help or hinder you in overcoming obstacles to change. Have a wonderful day. Positive juju, positive energy to all of you. Inhale and exhale. And tell me what you think. Give me your comments below. Would love to know what you think. I know some of you are listening and lurking, but you are not showing up yourself with the comments. Please, I would love to hear what you think. Thank you for listening.